And I think the logical place to go from there, if we possibly could, would be to hear from Mr. Ray Gunter, who's the Minister of Labour. There he is, in Transport House, and waiting to talk to him here, Robin Day.
Good morning, Mr. Gunter.
Good morning.
How are you feeling?
Not very well, but very happy.
You did quite well in Southwark, I think?
Yes, indeed.
15,401, that's good enough, isn't it?
I think that's sufficient.
Take a lot to shift you there, wouldn't it?
I'm hoping so. Yes, I think it will take a lot to shift me there.
Mr. Gunter, the news is this morning from the stock exchange that the pound is forging ahead against the dollar, and that opinion abroad seems relieved that after months of government on a knife-edge majority, there's now the prospect of an administration with a strong majority. Does that cheer you up?
Yes, indeed. I think that this is the lesson of the election, that the country has had 18 months of strong and real government, and now they have said we'll give the Labour Party an increased majority to continue in that way. That is, to go forward with strong and real plans in the interest of the economy of the country.
What do you think the government will be able to do now that it was not able to do before?
I think we can proceed now with detailed plans, particularly in the field of industry, which was always rather precarious because of the tiny majority in the House of Commons. We can bring perhaps an even deeper sense of purpose into the solution of the problems that we have to face. And there are those real problems still left, and let no one imagine that this election solves them. They are left, and therefore I imagine that Harold Wilson, with a strong government and a majority that will enable him to rule, will get down to the task of solving, as I say, these problems that have affected our economy now for so long.
You mentioned industry, Mr. Gunter. I've just been chatting to Mr. Harry Nicholas of the Transport and General Workers Union, and he said he would be interested to know when you are going to push ahead with local tribunals which can go in and deal with industrial disputes on the spot, on the scamp pattern?
Well, I think that there will have to be a period of reflection as to the path we take in this field of industry, but it is certainly true that my thoughts have been going as to how the experiment that has been so brilliantly successful under Jack Scamp might be adapted and in other industries. Thought will have to be given as to the question of industrial courts, whether they be the right one, the right course at the present time. I don't think we are quite sure, but certainly, as I have said in public speeches, my mind has been working along that road for some time.
Mr. Gunter, do you think that the Prime Minister will want to reconstruct his cabinet?
Oh, you'd better ask the Prime Minister that. I don't know.
Well, I asked you because I don't think he'll tell me if I get an opportunity. What do you think yourself? Do you think it's likely?
I say you'd better leave that to the Prime Minister. He is the only man who can determine that, and I just await his decision.
You're happy at the Ministry of Labour?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I've had a very exciting 18 months at the Ministry of Labour.
Could I ask you this, Mr. Gunter? What do you think about the complexion of the new Parliamentary Labour Party? It appears that quite a number of them are what might be called middle class, and I've got a note here saying there were more advertising and PR men in the than manual workers among the new intake. Do you think this is a good thing in the sense of broadening the basis of the party, or a bad thing in the sense that there won't be so many people from the shop floor and the factory?
Well, I don't know how many advertising and PR all people are included, but I think one of the significant things about the new Parliament will be the number of laddies who have come up from the working class but are now had their university educations, the new technicians, as it were. Indeed, I think there is a deep significance in the fact that perhaps the old class consciousness that lingered on within the Tory party and indeed within the Labour Party, this image of the cloth cap and the rest of it, is perhaps now finally over.
What is your comment, Mr. Gunter, on the warning which Mr. George Woodcock gave day before yesterday to all politicians about interfering with the trade unions and speeding up the prices and income policy too fast?
Well, I read with interest what Mr. Woodcock had to say, and of course there was a tremendous degree of truth in it. I have never argued any other than that there should be the minimum of government interference in the field of industrial relations. There is bound to be in a modern state a degree of interference. In other words, the state itself must have measures of control over matters that are so fundamental for our national life. But industry in the end, must go most of the way to solve its own problems, as I hope in a spirit of cooperation.
And a strong Labour government will go ahead with a strong early warnings bill, will it?
Well, that again is a matter that must be decided by the Prime Minister and my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Gunter, very much.
I think the best thing we can do now is just to have a comment from you, Ian.
Yes, I think we must say that one certain thing is that if Ray Gunter is more than likely to stay as Minister of Labour, he was certainly regarded, I think, by everybody as one of the big successes of the Labour government in the first 17 months. Great question mark, of course, over the early warning bill. And one other point in this field, the National Conference on Productivity under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister, which appeared in the Labour manifesto. It'd be interesting to know when that might be called and what the action might be. The other interesting thing, of course, was to hear Ray Gunter discussing the changing shape of the Labour Party. I think quite reasonable to speculate that the young technocrats, university lecturers that are coming through now as Labour MPs, 30 years ago they would have come through as trade union MPs, and it's part of the changing development and the broadening educational base of our whole society.
Good, thank you very much indeed, Ian. We'll now go over and join Kenneth Harris. Well, on my left, I've got Mark Abrams, whose poll was by far the most successful in predicting the result of this election, and next to him is Nicholas Deakin of the Institute of Race Relations, and on his left is Alan Watkins, the political correspondent of The Spectator. Well, your poll did very well, Mark Abrams. What about the polls as a whole?
Well, all of them, of course, predicted the victory of Labour, and I would have thought most of them showed that polls are now capable of measuring public opinion pretty accurately.
Well, what did the polls show you about your special interest, Nicholas Deakin?
Well, I think the Midland poll showed very interestingly a decline in interest in the immigration issue during the course of the campaign. It had, of course, been feared that the immigration issue would be very potent again in the West Midlands as it was last time. It hasn't been. I think all those concerned with good race relations in this country must be very relieved that the immigration issue hasn't proved to be very strong, that the Semitic aberration's over, and the miasma of fear associated with the issue is to some extent dispersed.
As a political correspondent, Alan Watkins, do you agree with what Mark Abrams says about the polls?
No, I don't. I agree that the polls have been quite good. But I think what has been extremely depressing about this election result is the way that the swing has operated uniformly throughout the country from 2 to 6%, without, so far as one can see, very much regional variation one way or the other. Well, this makes it easier for political commentators, it makes it easier for pollsters. I don't think it's a very healthy thing for democracy.
What do you think lies behind this particular result, Mark Abrams?
Well, I would have thought that what dominated the election this time, among several issues, of course, was the sheer personality of Mr. Wilson himself. And this affected two main groups. First of all, I think it helped to mobilize a section of working class people who were potential Labour voters, didn't vote last time, and this time they were able to identify themselves with a man who they felt clearly came from the working class. Now, they haven't been able to do this, you know, for over a generation. Every preceding Labour leader has been middle class or even upper middle class. And this is the first one they've been able to identify with in that way. Now, the other main contribution to the Labour gain, I think, has come from the young, white-collared, professional, semi-professional middle class, people who have moved up socially, so to speak, and these too have been able to identify themselves very much with Mr. Wilson. So that in this way he has merged two very important groups who see in Mr. Wilson themselves, their aspirations and their achievements.
Would you agree with that, Alan Watkins?
Yes, broadly I think I'd agree with it, but I think that there's something else, possibly more important, and that is that Mr. Wilson has turned the Labour Party into the sound, rather dull, almost dreary party. He's reversed the positions that obtained in the 40s and 50s, where the Labour Party had its Bevernites and its rows and so on. As the Conservative Party now has Enoch Powell, it's now the Labour Party which is sound and solid, and the Conservative Party which is exciting in an odd sort of way.
For the time being, we'll go right back to Cliff Michelmore. the
first result of this morning, Bodmin, good news for the Liberals. Peter Bessel has held the seat. His majority is down a bit, but on the drop of Jeremy Thorpe's majority, he might have lost the seat.
Not very much change there. Liberals down about 1,000, but the pattern very similar to last time. This must be comforting. The drop is a good deal less than it was in North Devon.
They must now be hoping to win North Cornwall, which they need under 1,000 vote turn, and possibly Torrington off the Conservatives. As the first result of this morning, the Liberals held Bodmin.
The Prime Minister's train left Liverpool on time at 8:15. It's now in Bletchley Station, I see. We've got cameras on the train and we've got a reporter on the train. It's due in Euston at 12:05. So as it stands in Bletchley Station, let's go and join John Morgan aboard the train.
We're here at Bletchley for another minute or two. Then we set off London for Euston. As Cliff said, we'll be getting in about 12:05. It looks as though we're going to be on time getting there. Well, the Prime Minister's on the train with his entourage, his secretaries, his family, his friends, and he's been reading the papers, and he looks in very good mood. He looked very buoyant this morning, even though he only had about 3 hours sleep last night. But he doesn't wish to speak to me on the train today. He refuses to, in fact. He proposes to make a statement when he gets to London, when he sees what the position is. He doesn't want to claim victory until he's absolutely certain the victory is his, and then there doesn't seem a lot of point in doing so. He's going, as I understand it, to go either first to Downing Street or to Transport House. He may later go to the Palace. Well, if he's not going to speak to us, there are other people on the train. The train is very crowded with journalists who've been following the Prime Minister around and who are probably as fatigued as I feel now after the excitements of last night up in Huyton and in Liverpool. Well, 3 have come into the compartment I have here. Well, there's Marsh Clark of Time magazine, American, Geoffrey Goodman, The Sun, and Sharpley of the Evening Standard. Sharpley, could I ask you first of all, what is the Prime Minister's appeal, if any, to women?
I'm not at all sure, because he has a kind of avuncular charm, but it's a very curbed one. You know, I was thinking last night, if only he'd waved his arms about and said whoopee. There was no joy or even gratitude. It was a kind of almost consolidated smugness, if it's not too strong a term, that, you know.
Well, one does hear that women are mesmerized by him. This is not so.
Well, I'm personally not, and I haven't met anyone who is. I'm sure that it is that they feel secure in his intelligence. I think this is it. I doubt if it's an emotional thing.
Marsh Clark, as an American following the Prime Minister, Mr. Heath around, how do you find you're received compared with the way in which journalists are received by candidates in America?
Well, insofar as the candidate himself is concerned, John, very, very well. The Prime Minister is undoubtedly far more accessible to the average reporter covering the campaign than would be the President of the United States during a campaign. And the working conditions from our point of view were excellent all the way along. I think the campaign here is far calmer than, perhaps saner than a presidential campaign.
But when you say saner, do you think this is an improvement in the American system?
Well, I wouldn't want to compare them in that way, say one is better than the other, but certainly there's far less of the pomp and the panoply here in terms of bands and buttons and all that sort of thing than there is in the United States. And yet I think that the Prime Minister's message and Mr. Heath's message got across very, very well. Because the campaign was well covered and the audiences, I feel, were politically quite sophisticated.
Geoffrey Goodman, do you think that after this campaign and after the politics of the last 18 months and before that, the public is now not going to want so much political reporting?
No, I don't think the public will want less political reporting. In fact, I think there's a great sophistication, political sophistication, developing in Britain for politics, growing all the time. I think one of the interesting features of this election has been precisely this. There's been a quiet attitude towards it, going around the country. It's not really been possible to see this great swing in operation. Now, plainly it was there, and I think this reflects sophistication, deep political thinking.
But does it also reflect that journalists now seem not capable of discovering what the public is thinking about? It's up to the polls to do that.
I think journalists would be capable of discovering it if they were prepared, if they, as journalists, were prepared to go into it a little more deeply, and indeed if the public were prepared to let journalists discuss it with them more deeply. I think the sort of the superficial answer to the journalist or the superficial question from the journalist is no longer relevant in terms of political reporting. I think we're going to see in the next 5 years much more reporting in depth, much more interest in depth. I don't think there's going to be a decline in interest, I think that the interest is going to develop differently. We're going to see a different form of political reporting. And indeed, as the world issues develop much more, embrace Britain, I think this is going to force British public opinion to think about world issues much more deeply.
Fine. Well, thank you.
May I put one thing in here? The worst place to cover a campaign is with the candidate, because it's like being in the eye of a hurricane. You go from one town to the other without being able to stop and to really make the sort of interpretive report that Jeff refers to.
Would you agree with that, Andrew?
Yes, I think we are the last to realise what, the public foment is thinking and saying. Trying to get down to issues with them was impossible because they wanted to be secretive about it. To discuss it with an individual would take an hour, and you would only have then one individual's answer. It's a very difficult thing to try and assess.
Well, all three of you, thank you very much. I believe this is the first live interview there's been on a train in this country, though perhaps not in America. And I now hand you back to John Morgan on a train going to Euston Station with the Prime Minister.
At the moment, it doesn't seem to be going very fast. I'm a bit worried about it being stuck at Bletchley. Now, I don't want to worry the four of you in that carriage there, but you know where that line goes through, do you? Because the next place you go through is Lindslade. And there has been an occasion in the past of a distinguished train being stopped by a number of people. So I don't want to worry you, but perhaps there's somebody in front of you clearing the line. Now, Ian, you want to say something?
Yes, we just saw the news that the Conservatives had held Truro, and this was a seat which was, in fact, slightly outside the swing, but not all that much.
Well, the Conservative share of the vote stayed just the same. It was a switch of 5% from Liberal to Labour, which may not have happy implications, though the Liberals were third last time, for the Liberals in North Cornwall. On the other hand, it might be the radical thing, the radical vote going to the further up of the two candidates, opposition candidates in the West Country.
And now we're going up to Birmingham to join Kenneth Alsop in the middle of a lot of people from Birmingham, I should imagine.
Yes, well, here in the Bullring Market in Birmingham, I'm surrounded by housewives and lady shoppers. How did the cost of living affect what you voted?
Well, I can't really... Well, I find the prices are much better now than they've ever been before.
How many children do you have?
5.
And you found living easier, you mean?
Oh, a lot easier, definitely a lot easier.
Have your husband's wages gone up in the past 17 months?
Yes, we get better wages now. I'm able to clothe the kiddies better and feed them better than I was before.
So you're happy about the result?
Oh, yes, I'm delighted, yes. Mr. Wilson every side.
Let me come across to you. Are you an old age pensioner?
Yes, and my sister also. There's just the two of us.
How do you find living? Is it easy or difficult?
Well, most things are pretty dear, and coal especially, tenant threatens them, and you can't afford that hardly.
But of course you have had a rise in the past year.
Oh yes, we get £4, like the pair of us. And I went 5 years without a pension, which made me 14 and 6 more. But you don't get any help, then that you spoil it. You work 5 years for nothing, and then you don't get any help.
But how important was the cost of living to you and the way you voted this time?
Well, I don't think it's very cheap. I mean, look, you couldn't buy a joint, not we couldn't. You just got to have chops or something like that, or bits of chicken.
How long have you been in Birmingham?
I've been here for 9 years.
And how have you found the cost of living while you've been here?
Well, it rises more and more all the time.
And are you now thinking that it will go on rising because Labour's been returned, or do you think this may help to control it?
Not that because Labour has the control of the government now, but that Mr. Wilson on a whole, as I think, it will be one of the best prime ministers that England have ever had or seen since I know, since I become old enough to be interested in politics. For 17 months, I think he has done well. I do not say that the cost of living has not cost me quite a lot of sad points, but in order for the government to make success, they would have to do something to prevent England from falling into a very serious position she had found herself.
Thank you. As a housewife, how do you feel about the result of the election?
Well, I voted for the Conservatives because I feel the cost of living has gone up quite considerably.
It's gone up, you mean, since Labour came into power?
Yes, I feel so. I've got 2 children and our families. And I did, well, we wanted to vote Liberal, but there wasn't a Liberal candidate, so we voted Conservative.
Do you think the Liberals have helped to keep the cost of living down?
I think they would probably have done if they'd have got enough seats now. So.
Well, why do you think things are going to get worse now that Labour's back?
I don't really know, but from what I've seen, you know, from the last 17 months, I can't see it getting much better.
Thank you. Kenneth Allsop, Birmingham.
The ultrasound studio results.
Now we have the figures for Truro. Geoffrey Wilson, his majority is down. He's held this seat since 1950.
A 2.8% swing to Labour, essentially a switch of just over 5% of votes from Liberal to Labour there. Turnout the same as last time. It went up, actually, in Bodmin, which is the seat next door we just heard from, 1.5% increase in turnout there.
And now we can go back to Kenneth Harris. Kenneth, ready for us again?
Yes, and I'm going to put a few questions to Alan Watkins this time, who is the political correspondent of The Spectator. He's taken part in the kind of group discussion we had, but I want to put some particular questions to him now. How do you think Ted Heath did on the whole?
I think he started off rather badly. He didn't show much self-confidence. He didn't deal with hecklers very well. He didn't seem to have any rapport with his audience. He improved tremendously in the campaign. I think his Birmingham speech on the Friday before the poll was very good indeed. I think he's come out of it with enhanced prestige, but it is arguable, of course, that any opposition leader going into a campaign of this sort does emerge with enhanced prestige unless he makes a complete mess of things, which Ted didn't do.
What do you think his position is going to be? Do you think he's going to be criticised from within the party?
I think there will be undertones of criticism. I think, however, there will be a very strong move to dampen down these undertones for the very good reason that the Tories have had 3 leaders in the last 3 years pretty well. They don't want to make themselves look even sillier than they may look at the moment in some people's eyes. I think there will be a great closing of the ranks, which the Tories know how to do very well. I think Ted is safe, I would say, for another year or so.
From the point of view of policies rather than personalities, what impact do you think this result is going to have on the Conservative Party?
I don't think it's going to make them change their policies at all. I think that most Conservatives believe that they had too much policy rather than too little. Or let me qualify that and say that the policy was put forward rather too near the election. It didn't have enough time to percolate either to the party itself or to the electorate. And this is different from Mr. Butler's policy after the 45 defeat, which was completed by 47, 48, which gave 2 or 3 years for the main proposals to sink in, as it were.
Assuming that at the moment there is a progressive tendency within the Conservative Party, do you think this is going to be heightened as a result of this election result, or braked?
Broadly speaking, I think it's going to be heightened. I think that the backwoods Conservatives are not, shall we say, very articulate. They certainly are in no mood to make very much of a fuss. A lot of them have lost their seats. Here, I take Miss Greenock Powell as a fairly progressive Conservative. I think the power light dispute will go on, but I think that old-fashioned conservatism, as we've understood it in the past, is pretty well dead now, and I think that Mr. Heath will see to it that it's buried outright.
Now, turning to the Labour Party for a moment, Alan Watkins, a number of people feel that with this big majority, the general character of Labour Party policy is going to be more left-wing. Some people have assumed that, in fact, the Prime Minister didn't want a big majority for that reason. Now, first of all, do you think that he did have misgivings about having a large majority?
No, I don't. I think that it's the simple view that's the right one, that the bigger the majority you have, in the last resort, the greater your control. Because although you may have a big majority, and although in those circumstances people may make a lot of fuss and may be allowed to make a lot of fuss, they cannot exercise real voting power. And in a sense, I suppose, you can say that the left lost its opportunity in the last Parliament when there was a small majority, and there were a number of cases where the left could have exercised influence, as Mr. Donnelly and Mr. Wyatt exercised over Steele. They didn't choose to take their opportunity. I think they've possibly lost it forever now.
Are you looking forward to any great changes in Labour Party policy as a whole as a result of this election?
No. No, I think that policy will continue very much as it is at the moment, with possibly higher social expenditure in the next 3 or 4 years, say, but certainly nothing immediate, because Mr. Wilson is very anxious to impress foreign opinion that he's behaving in a responsible way, and he hopes that his large majority will reinforce foreign opinion, and lead them to have even greater confidence in sterling and so on. No, I don't expect any great innovations in policy.
Now, you may have seen that I had 3 distinguished trade unionists sitting in these chairs a few moments ago, and well, I think we better go back to Cliff Michelmore for the moment. Thank you, Alan Watkins.
Well, you're only coming back to me, really, so that we can take a look at the state of the parties, because it's now 11:05. We really meant to have taken it at 11 o'clock, Bob, to be honest.
Yes. There we are with 166 more results to come. Labour still has almost exactly twice as many seats as the Conservatives, but of course the balance will begin to shift a little the other way as these rural seats come in. Labour's 42 gains, the Conservatives 43 losses. Still a complete failure by the Conservatives to break into any single Labour marginal, however narrowly held. The Liberals are 1 up on what they might have expected to be at this point. They made a net gain of 1, and if they hold all remaining seats, they'll come out of this election with 1 more in the House of Commons. The others, of course, are the Speaker and the Republican Labour in Northern Ireland. The party lead position then, shortly after 11, Labour's lead 150. That will come down almost certainly. We're expecting a Labour lead in the vicinity of 100, give or take 2 or 3 either way, depending on how some of the very marginal ones go. Interestingly enough, by the way, if it breaks around the 100 mark, we're going to end up with an extraordinarily near approximation in reverse of what happened in 1959. That is, Labour, the Conservatives then had a 100 lead over the others and ended up with 365, which might well be the figure Labour has in overall at the end of the day today.
Bob, don't go away, because in the middle of the public opinion poll discussion, you were straining at every leash that was holding you down in your seat to say something, and I was dying to know what it was.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think Mark Abrams, to some extent, closed ranks with his fellow pollsters by implying that they're all very good all the time, equally accurate, etc., etc. Now, I don't want to get into an argument with any individual pollster, but it is quite clear that they were all over the place, all on the side of a Labour win, of course, but there was a very wide range in their predictions, and there's no use ignoring that fact. We'll come back to it on the chart later.
How far does the man on my right agree or disagree with you, David Butler?
I agree entirely with Bob. The polls did well in that they all predicted a landslide. This is a relatively easy thing to do. What's hard is to get the actual number of seats. If, in fact, the result had been a close one and they'd had the margin of error they had, people would have been talking of the failure of the polls in this occasion.
The other interesting thing is what effect the polls actually have on the campaign. 1 or 2 people have mentioned this. Does it have a bandwagon effect? Does it feed complacency? Does it dispirit the party, which is shown to be well done?
I think that its main effect is, in fact, on...
Sorry, Dave,
yes.
Yeah, it's just the result from Folkestone and Hythe, which the Conservatives have held. That's indeed, they have ever since 1945.
It seems to me that the polls, in fact, have a main effect on the in-group of people, on the party officials, not on the mass public. When they've had polls on the polls, the public is surprisingly unaware of what the polls are showing. But certainly when you go into party offices on a Thursday when NOP has come out during the campaign, you're enormously aware of the lift in morale or the depression. The Conservatives believed that the polls would show a trend towards them, and it was a great blow to them each Thursday during this last month when that trend didn't in fact materialise.
Well, Judo, you say this, but travelling round, I discovered that there were quite a lot of people who were rather resentful about the polls. They were saying, I don't want people to tell me how I'm going to vote and why I'm going to vote like that. And it was particularly so towards the end of the campaign. It was much more noticeable towards the end of the campaign. And I noticed particularly when I went with George Brown throughout North Wales, where they are very independently minded politically, of course.
I would have thought this time that more than ever the public has been battered with the polls. Almost every other day.
I think the polls would have had a very different effect if it had been a very close election. It was because it was a landslide people resented being told there was no contest.
Let's take this result from Folkestone and Hythe now. This is a seat that the Conservatives have held ever since 1945.
What John Horton made 2.6% of the professions of the newly elected Labour MPs.
That's Costain, who's held the seat for 7 years himself with the Conservatives.
And in the middle of all that, there was Robert McKensie talking on a telephone and not pushing the cutout switch down on his microphone, so that we could all hear what he was saying on the telephone.
He didn't leave on the other side, sorry.
He didn't leave one on the other side. He's come to join us now. great main horseshoe desk. Now we're getting one or two results in.
Three results we've had in today. Two have been held by the Conservatives, the third, Bodmin, have been held by the Liberals, and we are beginning to get the trend which Bob McKenzie has been talking about. This Labour majority will tend to come back as the country areas, the rural areas, which are largely held by the Conservatives, begin to report. David?
Well, according to the computer, there are 5 seats due to come in where there is a virtual certainty of a Labour Party gain: Norfolk South West, Rushcliffe, High Peak, South Bedfordshire and Monmouth. And South Northampton looks a better than even bet, and Peterborough a better than even bet. That would push one up to a 99 Labour majority. The 2 or 3 others are just trembling, even odds either way.
But can I raise the question, just a moment, Ian, about how much local variation, because I think all of us remember in 1964 the variation within East Anglia, which seemed to upset a lot of the predictions.
Well, the computer was trying to make allowance for the local variation, for the results in rural and urban seats and the like. In fact, people have been exaggerating the extent of the variation, I think. I thought Alan Watkins was quite right just now when he stressed that the swing had been very uniform. In all of our 6 regions, the swing is within 1% of the national average swing. And in individual constituencies, over half the individual constituencies have a swing that is within 1% of the national average swing.
So it's all built into this likely majority that you're talking about, 100, give or take 1 or 2.
One seat that we must watch particularly, in addition to the list that David mentioned, is Bedford, which is Christopher Soames' seat.
A 34% chance, according to the computer, of Bedford taking, less than even chance, but 1 chance in 3 of Christopher Soames losing his seat, according to the latest computer figures.
Now, it's the best chance in the world that we're going to hear from Robert McKenzie.
Well, we've been doing a little breakdown of the occupations of the newly elected Labour MPs, and it's quite fascinating. The largest single group are university lecturers. 9 of the 42 are university lecturers. If you throw in teachers, another 6, you've got 15 who are in the profession of education, which gets on for half the new Labour MPs. What's also fascinating is that journalists have 6, for example, and the manual workers have 2, which happens to be the same number as business executives. There are 2 manual workers, 2 business executives, for a total in all, if you add trade union officials, of 4 of strictly proletarian background and immediate occupation, combined with 37 who are middle class of one category or another. Only 1 listed as a housewife, surprisingly enough. But the weight in favor of journalists, of educators, of business executives adds up to a large proportion of the new members on the Labour side.
You must excuse our laughter when you were talking about university lecturers, Professor McKenzie, weren't you? We shall now go to Manchester, 200 miles up there, to Michael Parkinson, who's standing, it looks like, in the rain in Manchester, somewhere near Peterhouse, I think he is.
That's a very soggy Manchester. Why do you think that Labour have won so handsomely?
Well, for the simple reason that it's a working class majority by working class people, I hope. And as for Mr. Wilson, I'm very proud of him. He's worked hard, and he's getting the country on its feet again.
What about Mr. Heath? How did he come across to you in the election?
Well, he's a stranger. He came from nowhere. And his idea of putting prescriptions back to payment for old folks is wrong.
Some candidates have made crime an issue in the Manchester area. What do you think about this?
Well, I think if the only majority that can get by that, I think it's a failure.
You? What about you? You voted how?
Conservative.
And you must be a fairly disappointed man.
Well, I like Mr. Wilson. He's got good ideas, but is he sincere? That's the point.
Well, what do you think?
Well, you will have to see now.
Well, what about Mr. Heath? How do you think he showed in this?
Well, I think he's been rather childish. In fact, I think they both have.
How do you mean childish?
Well, the way they're sort of bickering at each other. I think if someone would come along and say, this is the policy, it doesn't matter what the other parties think, this is the policy, this is what we should do, this is what we've got to do, I think everybody would swing to them.
Are you looking forward to 4 years of Labour rule?
Not really, no.
Why?
Well, I think the first 12 months will tell whether it's going to be good or not, and after that time, we'll know whether it's going to be good and we'll know whether it's going to be healthy or not.
Thank you. Did you vote, love?
Yes, Conservative.
Conservative?
Yes.
Why?
Conservative. I don't know, because all my family voted it, I suppose.
And what do you think to Mr. Heath?
Well, I think he's a good man. I like the street.
And what about Mr. Wilson? How did he show to you?
Well, I doubt on the street, I think.
What about you? How do you vote?
Conservative.
Conservative. Why?
Because I think they're the best party by far.
Are you disappointed?
Well, not really.
Well, why do you think they lost?
Well, I don't really know. I think
that it's probably as well that they got in. Let them get out of what they've got into.
Well, how do you mean?
Well, you know, generally.
Fine, thank you. How did you vote, sir?
Pardon?
How did you vote?
I didn't vote at all.
Why not?
Well, it's very unfortunate. I removed in the...
Well, if you had voted, who would you have voted for?
Pardon? Oh, Labour.
Who showed... what do you think to Mr. Wilson's showing in this election?
Well, I think he's a grand chap. And I think you should give him a chance. He hasn't had a fair chance just these last few months, but I think if the working man will stand by him and do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, I think he'll get the country out of a mess to the rest.
Well, what do you think, what do you hope from Labour in the next 4 years?
Oh, full employment and the national debt. I hope they'll solve that in the next 5 years.
And what about you? How did you vote?
I vote Labour.
Why?
Because I feel that probably with a 5-year team they could probably make good the promises, frankly.
And what sort of promises do you want them to keep? What do you want at the end of this 4 years?
Personal, I would like to see them tackle the Land Commission and possibly push through comprehensive education. I think these are two big issues. I wasn't terribly concerned about the economics because I think that neither party for a long time can really do very much about this. Comprehensive education and the land prices, I think, are very important.
How do you think Mr. Heath showed on this election?
With a very limited argument, probably towards the, as the campaign went on, better, frankly, from the beginning, with virtually one hand behind his back, I thought.
Thank you very much. How did you vote?
I voted for the Conservatives.
Why?
Well, I think there's too much to the left swing on the Labour Party.
I'm sorry?
There's too much of the left swing with the Labour Party.
Are you frightened of this?
Well, yes, I am, actually.
Why?
Well, I think the Labour left is just the opposite to the Conservative right. And I think in the seats that have gone, I hope that they haven't gone too far to the left swing.
How do you think Mr. Heath showed?
Well, I think he showed rather a defeatist attitude to the whole thing.
Do you think with another leader they might have pulled it off?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't like to comment on that.
How do you... What's marvellous?
That the Labour Party's in.
Why did you say that?
Because it's a damn good thing for this country.
Why?
Well, really, I think God would be in a hell of a mess if the Tories had got in.
And what do you hope as a young person from Labour in 4 years of rule which we're going to have now?
What do I want personally? I don't know. I'm more concerned about the future of this country and the future of our economic position. And I think...
Well, where do you think we'll be in 4 years after the Labour Party have been in for 4 years?
My God, some way towards a socialist state, I hope.
How do you think Mr. Heath showed to you?
Oh, I think he's been very gentleman about it, especially as he acknowledged his defeat early on in the evening and didn't act like that other man, his name, who just pretended that we'd wait for the last vote to come in to see what would happen. No.
And what about Mr. Wilson? How do you think he should?
Well, we've lost the sounds about there, but it's interesting the girl underlined what Robert McKenzie was saying last night about him conceding defeat. Now, let's go down now to Bilston to join Derek Hart at Stewart and Lloyd's.
Here we are in the melting shop at Stewart and Lloyd's Steelworks at Bilston. Now, are you all happy about the result of the election? You are?
Yes.
This is what you hope for, is it?
This is what we hope for, yes, in my opinion, anyway. I think Wilson's a far best leader the country's had since it was born, anyway.
Yeah. What about you, sir? Are you as pleased about the results as your colleagues?
Well, I didn't think they'd come as far as they have done.
You didn't?
No, I didn't know.
What did you expect the result would be then?
Oh, I thought they'd win, the Labour.
We've heard a lot in the last 24 hours about the mesmeric effects of the Prime Minister on the people of this country. Do you think that this is a true state of affairs?
Yes, I think he's a fine man myself.
Well, I think
so. I think he's based his way of life on the same as Mr. Churchill at the time of his political career. I think he's the double of Mr. Churchill.
What do you think have been the essential issues in this election?
I think they're pretty good.
Well, what have they been for you? What caused you to vote the way you did?
We'll have to wait and see for that, won't we?
You have to what?
Wait and see.
What do you expect then from this Labour government in the next 4 or 5 years? What are the things that you most hope to see?
A fair deal. That's
what we expect from the working man. Put the Labour government in to give him a fair deal for the country and for the working man.
But what do you mean by a fair deal, exactly?
To help the working man. That's what the working man put them there for, didn't they? To help the old-age pensioners and things like that. That's what the Labour government stand for, and that's what we stand for, the working man. That's why we put them in, I think, and I think everybody's the same idea.
Yes, I think so. I think if they fight for the good of the country and get the old Union Jack flying again, I think that's what we all want.
What about the country's economy as a whole? How do you think that this is going to be affected by this Labour government this time?
Oh, I don't know.
You feel that the cost of living is likely to go up or to go down?
Well, I think it might. It will go up, but I don't think it'll be much. I think it will go up.
Are you happy to face that?
Well, we've got to be.
Come on, Bill.
I don't know what to say.
It's pretty certain, I would think now, that the Prime Minister will go ahead with plans for nationalising steel. Now, how is that going to affect you in the steel industry, on the floor?
Well, the last time it was nationalised, I don't think anyone found any difference at all. Not on the working floor, at any rate. I didn't see any change in the management, right from management level right down to working class level.
Do you think there'll be any difference?
Well, I wasn't here the last time, so I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't think it should affect the working man anyway.
No.
I say I don't think it should affect the working man.
Derek Hart and Stuart and Lloyd Stilton.
I'm from Derek Hart and Stuart and Lloyd's. Let's go down to the city of London, to Throgmorton Street and James Mossman.
Well, here in the city, we're just starting to try and find out the effect of this general election on the markets and on money. And I have here, first of all, a gold expert who's just come from the gold fixing meeting this morning, and he's going to tell us what effect on gold prices the prospect of a Labour landslide has had.
Actually, the effect, the market has taken the news of the election very calmly. Actually, the price against the dollar rose slightly this morning, but on the other hand, the price against sterling fell by a halfpenny to 2.51 and 7p. This fall was occasioned mainly by the firmer tendency of sterling against the dollar in the exchange market. And I think one can say that the first reactions in the market to the result of the elections are not unfavourable for sterling.
How significant are the first reactions in the long run? Is that possible to say?
Well, not always, but they are quite a good indication.
You're feeling fairly optimistic this morning, are you?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now back to Cliff Michelmore.
All right, sorry. I was talking to my man upstairs. Now, I think we're going across to join Kenneth Harris, if I'm not mistaken, aren't we?
Well, again, I've got some distinguished foreign journalists here. Olivier Todd again on my left, Karl Meyer from the Washington Post, and Hans Gressman from Die Zeit, who arrived in this country only yesterday. I meant to ask you earlier, Olivier Todd, when you were going around the country covering the campaign, did you think the main issues were that determined this result?
Well, I feel that for ordinary British people, the main issues were very concrete ones. Housing, the cost of living, pensions. I think that the Labour Party managed to convince by Mr. Crossman that if its aims were the same as far as building is concerned, everybody's been talking about the magic figure, $500,000. I think the Labour Party managed to convince people that it would give a fairer deal to the lower income brackets, that people would be able to get better mortgages and so on. That's on a short-term range. Yeah. The larger issues, and that is my impression, the fundamental one, I think, is can a democratic socialism work? After all, seen from abroad, this is the main point. Can a non-authoritarian socialism work? Of course, this begs one question, is how socialistic is Mr. Wilson?
Karl Meyer?
I think an interesting footnote to that. I was struck by the fact that the Prime Minister hardly ever used the word socialism in the campaign. He spoke about social justice instead, which seemed to me one of the issues, the concrete issues in this campaign. We saw it in the interviews people have had in the streets, the question of pensions and mortgages and so on. I think that every campaign, to some extent, is a tribal function in which there are war whoops and wind machines and tribal dances. This isn't an exercise in reason or a platonic dialogue. And I think that where the campaign failed to bring up the real issues is that on a short-term basis, England is going to have to go through a process of arduous and difficult readjustment, possibly involving unemployment, possibly involving deferment of growth. This is something that none of the politicians really talked about, frankly, I think.
Hans Gressman, now you came only yesterday, didn't you? So you won't have covered the campaign, but perhaps you can tell us what you think the reaction in Germany is to the results as we've had it so far.
Well, I tell you, the most important single point, of course, is the European issue. And there's a brand new news from Bonn, the reaction of the two big parties, a West German Social Democratic, that is opposition party spokesman said, we are confident that Wilson's policy will advance European and Atlantic cooperation. And a spokesman for Chancellor Adenauer is still with us. For Chancellor Ludwig Erhard's ruling Christian Democratic Party said it was to be hoped Britain would not miss its chance to join Europe. And I think this really is significant, that the two big parties comment on this outcome of the election in a European framework.
Now, what do you think the leaders of the two parties think about the chances of Harold Wilson taking this country into Europe?
Well, I wouldn't know what the two party leaders think, but anyway, the one who is in charge, Erhard, is trying his best to push this question. As you know, Ludwig Erhard, in his own party, as well as Schröder too, Foreign Minister Schröder too, has been criticized again and again because he was apparently too pro-British. But in general, I would feel Erhard will try to advance and improve the bilateral contacts between the Federal Republic and Great Britain. The old quarrel about the cost of the Army of the Rhine, maybe he will try to get over the disagreements in the nuclear question. But in general, really, the only important thing is Wilson prepared, finally, to arrive at a new policy toward Europe?
May I come in on that?
Do.
I think that overseas observers will be looking very closely at the man the Prime Minister appoints as the Common Market Ambassador. He said that he's going to appoint someone to inquire into the possibilities of joining. Depending on who he chooses, I think we'll have a better idea of what his real intentions to Europe are. I've heard several names, Gordon Walker, Lord Chalfont, and even George Brown. I think this is going to be the next thing that people are going to be looking for.
Olivia Todd?
Yes, since we're throwing names about, I think that Jenkins would be a very popular man in France from that point of view.
Perhaps we could come back and have a word about that later. Now back to Cliff.
Yes, indeed, because we want to bring you up to date with two results.
There is Edmonds, and a good result for Eldon Griffiths.
Only 0.4% swing to the Conservatives. This is very important because there are 4 marginal seats still to come in rural Norfolk. Here is one in a Liberal withdrawal, which may have helped the Conservatives, but almost no swing. This must put Labour's seat in North Norfolk possibly in jeopardy and reduce their confidence in capturing southwest Norfolk and Yarmouth, and certainly the outside possibility of South Norfolk teetering on the brink.
Ludlow, Jasper Moore holds this for the Conservatives, but his majority is done.
4% swing there, next door to the Wrekin, which is Labour's gain of their only seat in Shropshire.
There was a Liberal withdrawal there. Now Easington, and this is Manny Shinwell's seat, which always returns 20,000, 25,000. It's one of those rock-solid Labour seats in Durham.
1% swing in this safe Labour mining seat.
Manny Shinwell was the oldest MP in the last Parliament. He's 80, but he's still decidedly active.
Presumably will be the oldest one in this one too. Now, just before we go on, a very brief comment. We don't want to encourage people to phone. Someone asked, what is the Republican Labour candidate Belfast going to do at Westminster? Increase the Labour majority by 1 or not? Ian Trossard. What a dreadful question to put here.
I think you can assume he will increase the Labour majority, but he'll also have some Irish issues of his own which he'll want to push. Now, you've just seen that the Conservatives have held Morecambe and Lonsdale. That's Ian Fraser's old seat. Majority is down by 4,000. That's
big swing there.
But it's a safe Conservative seat. They ought to hold that one.
The last Republican Labour candidate from Belfast West didn't attend a great deal, the House of Commons.
True. But I think that it won't be crucial if the Labour government's got a majority of 100 anyway.
All right, now we're going to the Labour Party headquarters. We're going to join down there Peter Woon. Oh, he's not up there.
Transford House, the morning after, and Labour's bandwagon still rolling. And some of the talk here this morning is about how this campaign was masterminded, because believe me, it was masterminded. This majority is no accident. Now, as I understand it, the organisation committee of the Labour Party met in this building literally within a few days of the last election and decided to concentrate on 40, note that 40, not 20, 40 Tory-held marginals. And it's no accident, as I say, that they've taken practically every one of them. They moved their best agents into these marginals. They made sure that weekend speeches by political leaders were made in these same constituencies. They made sure that what money was available went there if it possibly could. And as a second priority, they then looked at the Labour-held marginals and put some effort into there. But it was those 40 Tory seats they were going to, leading to a potential majority of 80, and that's how they've done it. Now, the sort of man that this campaign has got back into the House, Michael Barnes, the new member for Brentford and Chiswick. Now, was your campaign nationally based in its appeal?
Yes, it certainly was. I mean, basically what we were saying to the electors of Brentford and Chiswick was that give Harold Wilson a chance and the Labour government to carry on with the job they've started so well in 17 months. But at the same time, we were very careful to tie this national campaign to those issues that were highly relevant in Brentford and Chiswick.
Now, you're one of these advertising men who's come back into the House. I think you were involved, in fact, in picking the slogan last time, let's go with Labour. Do you think these sort of things matter?
Yes, I do. I think it's a great help if you can get the right slogan, because if you get the slogan that sums up the total appeal that the party is trying to make at any given time, then I think this can be a great help.
And what about the one this time?
I think it's good. You know Labour government works. I think this makes people think. I think it's a good slogan.
And the sort of pop art aura, is that good?
I think it is. It's contemporary, yes.
As an advertising man, what sort of accounts have you dealt with?
Well, most of my time has been spent on a motor car account, one of the biggest in the country.
Now, is there any similarity in selling glossy motor cars and selling glossy political parties?
I don't think so at all. I think there are very important differences. The techniques are the same, the basic techniques, but there are very important differences because they're very different things in different areas.
We don't think, as Robin Day was saying to Ray Gunter recently, of advertising men as being typical Labour Party MPs. What do you think about that?
I don't see why they shouldn't be.
Now, you've got 5 years ahead of you as a new MP. What sort of thing do you want to achieve?
Well, what I want to see most, I think, are big steps forward in the field of housing and in the field of education, because these are two fields where in Brentford and Chiswick there really is a great deal to be done.
Mr. Barnes, good luck and thank you. Peter Woon, Labour Party headquarters.
And back here in our great studio, we're going across in just a moment to Robert McKensie. Bob?
Just to look now at the fate of the Liberals so far. We've gathered them here together. They've lost one seat, Cardigan, where Roderick Bowen went out. You may remember that result was declared when Joe Grimond was himself being interviewed, and I didn't think he showed any signs of bursting into tears, because it's a well-known fact that Mr. Bowen had taken a rather independent line in deciding to become Deputy Chairman of Ways and Means, and thereby losing, for the time being, a Labour vote in the House of Commons, a Liberal vote in the House of Commons. They had their two gains, remember, Cheadle, Cone Valley. They've held North Devon, Orpington, Eric Lubbock, of course, and Roxburgh, David Steele, and Bodmin with Bessel. Now, to glaring today are the following 5 Liberal seats, which could give them a strength altogether of 11 if they hold them all, including Joe Grimond's, Orkney and Shetlands, which may not, in fact, of course, finally be known until tomorrow. But that's the run now, and I think we ought to see how their prospects seem in some of the regions, including Southwest, first of all, with Tony Barker.
Remember that in the Southwest we're looking at 3 constituencies which lie directly together: Cornwall North, Truro and Bodmin. Remember that the Liberals have held Bodmin, but Labour moved ahead in Tory Truro. Now, the Liberal share of the vote is down only 2.4% in Peter Bessel's Bodmin, and that's better than Liberal experience in the West so far. In neighbouring Truro, Labour did much better. There was a 5% switch from Liberals to Labour, and so it seems to me that North Cornwall is still very much in doubt. It is, we think, Bodmin rather than Truro which is out of line in this part of our region, because I think that although Bessel is in possession of Bodmin, he has the power of being the incumbent Liberal MP. It is in North Cornwall that we shall be looking, because Bodmin is out of line rather with the rest of the region. They're neighbouring seats, and there may be influences spreading across their borders.
We've just got the result from Banff, where the Liberal ran second, but the seat was still held by the Tory. But there was a sharp drop in the majority down to 1377. Now, this was one of the seats that was hoped to be won by the Liberals. It does rather suggest the swing to the Liberals is not going to be nearly so great in Scotland as we expected. For instance, if one looks at those seats in which the Liberal Party is fairly strong in Scotland, the swing this time and last time was only 0.3% to the Liberal Party. Now, to win West Aberdeenshire, which is their main hope, in addition to Caithness and Sutherland, Ross, Cromarty, Inverness and Joe Grimmon's seat, to win West Aberdeenshire, on which they're pinning their hopes, there would have to be a swing of 6.7% Conservative to Liberal. Now, this is the figure, James Davison, who made a great fight last time, but clearly things aren't running their way this time. On to Ken Morgan on the Welsh desk.
Well, Wales has proved to be very much the weak link for the Liberal Party in this election. And this confirms, I think, the steady decline of the Liberal Party in Wales ever since the end of the Second World War. We've had no Torringtons or Roxburghs in Wales since 1945. In this election, we've had 8 results so far in Wales in which Liberals are concerned. Their vote has gone down in 4 of these seats. They've also lost 3 deposits. Their main strength still clearly is in the rural areas of Wales with declining population. In fact, they did disappointingly there. In Meirionydd there was a swing to Labour, although the Liberals of course still came second. In Carmarthen there was a disastrous drop in the Liberal vote of 6.2%. And the most serious of all, Cardiganshire. After all, Mr Bowen, although as Bob McKenzie said he is Deputy Chairman of Ways and Means, he'd been the Liberal member for Cardiganshire since 1945. It's an old Liberal seat. It's been a Liberal seat since 1880, one of the 2 Liberal seats in Wales. To lose this seat is a crushing blow for Welsh liberalism. This confirms, I think, and possibly Denby later on today will again confirm it, the decline of the Liberal Party, the irremediable decline, it would seem. The Liberals, to use Arthur Schlesinger's distinction, have become a party of memory rather than a party of hope as far as Wales is concerned. We may well be looking, therefore, at, indeed, the strange death of Liberal Wales. Back to you, Cliff.
No, not back to me. David Butler's going to have a dreadful accident unless he says something.
The Banff result actually has a major implication for the rest of the results. It's the first North Scotland one of this sort. It showed, in fact, an 8.8% increase in the Liberal vote. If the Banff result is reflected in East and West Aberdeenshire and South Angus, the Liberals may hope for some gains there and may hope to hold the 4 North of Scotland seats that they have got at the moment. It really is a major departure from the trend. The Liberals pushed up from 3rd to 2nd place with an 8.8% increase in their vote.
Well, I was watching Mr Grimmond, our Liberal Party headquarters, when Banffshire was declared, when we gave you the Banffshire result, and whether it was anguish or delight I wouldn't know, but Robin Day will now discover.
That was about what I was going to ask. Mr Grimmond, after having slept on these results, what is your verdict as regards the Liberal Party?
Well, let's look at Banff. My expression was anguish at the extraordinary comment made about it. I don't think whoever made the first comment can learn anything about the situation. Of course, David Butler is quite right. This is an extremely good result from our point of view. This is a constituency which we were 3rd and therefore might have been squeezed, and it is a constituency in which we have built up immensely at this election.
Robert McKenzie said a little earlier that you didn't show any sign of bursting into tears at the news of the loss of Cardigan. What is your comment on Professor McKenzie's comment?
I don't burst into tears much anyway. But as far as Cardigan is concerned, of course I am sorry to lose a Liberal seat.
Mr Grimmond, generally the Liberal share of the vote appears to have gone down and will probably have gone down from 11.2% of the total vote last time to about 8%. Now, do you think that's due to having less candidates or a decline in Liberal appeal?
Well, certainly most of it is due to having less candidates. Also, I think it should be remembered that we've now, I understand, got over 1.5 million votes. And for this we have received 6 seats. This is a result of our extraordinary electoral system.
Mr Grimmond, how do you see the Labour government shaping now with Mr Wilson having a strong majority? Do you think he's going to change at all, either in terms of political direction or in terms of political tactics?
I'm not sure that these 2.5-second views on the next 5 years in Parliament, tossed off before the election is even over, are really very useful.
But I did say during the election that I think it will be dangerous to have a very large Labour majority unless there is also a strong Liberal contingent in Parliament. I still think that. I think the Labour Party is all too likely to slip back into its most conservative and restrictionist attitude, but I hope that we shall still see this strong Liberal contingent in Parliament, and we shall certainly work in Parliament to keep Labour a progressive party.
Forgive me for putting another question of this kind, Mr. Grimman, but we have infinite confidence in the instant wisdom of politicians on these occasions. What do you think is likely to be the main task of the Liberal Party in this Parliament as we see it shaping at the moment?
You certainly have plenty of confidence. The main task over 5 years will take me some time to explain, but certainly one of our tasks will be to press the policies on which we fought the election. No doubt the first thing we've got to turn our attention to is the economic situation and the budget, and then to really make a very powerful campaign for regional development. Also, we hope, of course, to influence the Labour Party to change its foreign policy.
Briefly, Mr. Grimman, have you any further thoughts this morning on the question of your possible retirement in view of the large Labour majority?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Grimman.
Here at Aberdeen, we're just about to hear the result of the West Aberdeenshire election. The returning officer, Sheriff MacDonald, has lined up the candidates, and this looks, from the order of the candidates as they do them in Aberdeen, that this is going to be a surprise result. He's just about to announce it.
The result of the poll for the election of a Member of Parliament for the West Aberdeenshire constituency is James Duncan Gordon Davidson, 15,151. Alexander Forbes Henry, 13,956. John Henderson, 6,008. I therefore declare Mr. James Duncan Gordon Davidson to be duly elected Member of Parliament for that constituency. I'd like to say to the electors...
Esmond, right? Are you going to correct that? That said no change. That's not right, is it?
This does, of course, indicate the profound difference between liberalism south of the Highland Line and liberalism in the country north of the Highland Line. Because this is a victory of a figure who fought a gallant campaign last time, reduced Forbes Henry majority from 12,000 to 4,000, and has now won the seat. Indeed, he was talked of in The Economist, no less a newspaper than The Economist, as a potential leader of the Liberal Party should Mr. Grimman retire from that party. Quite obviously, this is a result that will bring great strength and great heart in Ross and Cromarty, in Caithness and Sutherland, and clearly Liberals are still on the march in the north of Scotland. Over now to Cliff.
Let's make it absolutely clear, that was a Liberal game.